Valentin Speransky, a former professor at the University of St. Petersburg who emigrated to Paris after the revolution, visited Yekaterinburg in 1924 to give a series of lectures. While he was there, he interviewed people from various political parties and walks of life, including Bolsheviks, who had at one time been connected with the terrible events that had taken place there only 6 years earlier. One of the more important people who gave information to Speransky was Anatoly Yakimov, who served as a guard at the Ipatiev House. Yakimov preserved very important details from the period of his service there. He included some of these in his deposition when he was interrogated by the special investigator Sokolov in 1919. But one particularly important account he related only to Speransky in 1924. According to Yakimov, a remarkable phenomenon soon became apparent at the Ipatiev House: the unaffected kindness and natural simplicity of the comportment of the members of the imperial family did not go unnoticed by the soldiers. As time passed, some of the guards at the Ipatiev House began to perceive the situation differently, a fact that ultimately affected their attitude toward the prisoners. He relates the following.
Some answered the Tsar gently, the others with a boorish taunt. I have seen such scenes. Head-to-head with Nicholas Alexandrovich, one of our comrades spoke to him humbly. But as soon as he saw one of the others approaching, he changed his tone. At the beginning, some of our young people were happy to be cheeky in front of the prisoners and to cause them inconvenience. But little by little, if we cannot say that they became faultless, at least they were correct in behavior, and we finally avoided acting casually in the presence of the imperial family.
Yakimov also related the following revealing details.
Nothing was left of my ideas about the Tsar that I had before I became a guard. I started to think differently of them after I saw them with my own eyes. I started to feel pity for them as human beings. In my head, an idea was born. Let them escape. What can I do to allow them to escape? I never told anyone, but I had an idea to talk to the doctor, Vladimir Derevenko, who used to visit them. But then I was wary of him. I thought, I don't know what kind of person he is. His face had no expression when he was leaving them, and he never said a word about them, so I was too wary. Before I became a guard, not having seen or known them, I too was, in a way, guilty toward them. Avdeev and the comrades would sometimes sing revolutionary songs, and I would join in a little. But once I saw what's what, I quit all that, and almost all of us, if not all, came to criticize Avdeev for it.
The propagandistic image of the bloodthirsty Romanovs, which circulated among the masses, had already begun to fall apart. The revolutionary rhetoric about the arrogant disdain of the imperial family for Russia and their oppressive malevolence crumbled at the sight of this loving family, so approachable and, if circumstances permitted, ready to relate to every person who approached them. Yakimov said the following about Nicholas.
His eyes were nice, kind, as was his entire face. In general, he gave the impression of being a nice person, simple, sincere, and talkative. He looked like he wanted to talk to us. He would sit in the sun, his eyes lowered, and we could feel an innate strength in him. I often thought that he had to despise from the bottom of his soul all of these peasants, these rascal scoundrels who became his guardians. However, Nicholas Alexandrovich was master of himself, and so to each person he could quietly say the appropriate word in an affable way. His voice was sweet and clear, his manners excessively pleasant. His eyes were blue and very pleasing. When one of our foolish men, under the influence of drink, portrayed him as a villain or spoke to him rudely, he replied politely and patiently. His clothes were patched and his boots completely worn out. The Emperor's valet said that before the revolution, he liked to wear the same clothes and the same shoes for a long time. I managed to speak with him twice. The first time I was on guard in the garden. One day in the spring, I came on duty just as the Emperor and his family were let out for their walk. I stood at a distance as they walked around, speaking quietly in English and admiring the green, fresh branches of the trees. The Emperor, sensing from my demeanor that I was neither insolent nor a braggart, came near me, looked at me quietly, and spoke to me as though we had known each other for a long time. He said, "This is a beautiful time for working the fields." I answered politely and said, "That's right. Now it is the time for the peasants, for the most profitable work." Then, little by little, we spoke about the harvests and the price of wheat. I began to take a real interest in our conversation. But suddenly Commandant Avdeev harshly shouted that the time for walking was over. Alexandra seemed distant, withdrawn within herself. This reserve became even more noticeable because of the precisely opposite disposition of Nicholas and the Grand Duchesses. At first, Alexandra would often come out into the garden for a walk. But when some of the guards began asking her offensive questions, she stopped going out.
Yakimov says of Alexandra,
Her gaze was stern. Her figure and manners were those of a proud and haughty woman. At one time, a group of us talked about what we thought of all of them, that Nicholas Alexandrovich was a simple man, while she, Alexandra, was not simple, and that she looked like a Tsaritsa. She appeared older than him. On her temples, grey hairs were noticeable. Her face was not that of a young woman, but of an old one.
In saying these things, the guards were obviously unable to comprehend the terrible state of Alexandra's health, which left her little room to behave differently. She was a gravely ill and almost completely disabled woman. The publisher of the newspaper, the Ural Worker, who served for a short time as a guard at the Ipatiev House, relates that Alexandra constantly suffered from migraines and indigestion. She would recline on the couch with her head bound in a compress. As for the Grand Duchesses and Alexei, Yakimov said the following.
It seemed that Tatiana was similar to the Tsaritsa. She also looked stern and proud like her mother. However, she smiled pleasantly when she met decent and appropriately acting guards. The rest of the daughters, Olga, Maria, and Anastasia, did not have any haughtiness. One could tell by looking at them that they were simple and kind. Olga, the eldest, was like her brother, pale and sickly, but that did not prevent her from being active. Her eyes most of the time looked sad and tired. During the walks, she stood apart from her sisters and gazed sadly into the distance. She played the piano more often than her sisters, and when she wished to play for herself, she chose something plaintive. Maria was friendlier, a true Russian beauty, although in her veins flowed blood that was more German, Danish, and English than Russian. When Maria smiled, her eyes shone so brightly that it was a pleasure to see her. Her face was more often rosy than those of her sisters. Her laughter was so cheerful and infectious that it would have been delightful to play and joke with her. One could see that an invincible force animated her temperament. I remember one day in the garden when she firmly grasped a huge tree branch and began to swing from it until Commandant Yurovsky angrily shouted, "Citizen, stop damaging the trees." Anastasia was a charming little brat. She was so mischievous that I think one could never become bored in her company. Lively and restless, she continually performed comic pantomimes with her favorite dog, just as one sees at the circus. The heir was always ill. I cannot say anything about him. The Tsar would carry him out to the wheelchair, and he was covered by a blanket.
When they were off duty, these men in the barracks, at the taverns, and in their homes would openly speak with sympathy about the emperor and his family. a certain female friend of Yakimov declared with evident displeasure. It was only in the last days that I began to notice that not only him, but also the other guards of my acquaintance were gradually becoming counter-revolutionary. They began to have troubled consciences, like old women poisoned by religion, and became less rigid. Instead of remembering the great crimes committed by Nicholas the Bloody and Alexandra with Rasputin, they began to argue like real bourgeois. They lost their direction completely, those idiots. Later, when the tragic events occurred, these guards were horrified that they had been unable to help the family. They said in desperation,
Yes, we had pity for them, but what could one do? When you are the guard, you have to perform your duties.
Despite all this, not all the soldiers shared the same feelings toward the family. Moreover, the few soldiers who did sympathize with them had no opportunity to express it, since all communication with the prisoners was strictly forbidden. There were only very few occasions when the prisoners exchanged a few words with the guards. Most of the guards remained deeply imbued with the revolutionary zeal of the time and seized every opportunity to display it. The commandant of the Ipatiev House was the 30-year-old Alexander Avdeev, a man who lived in a world of boasting and drink. He habitually used coarse language and made great displays of Bolshevik zeal. Avdeev displayed his harsh vocabulary at every opportunity. One of the guards at the Ipatiev House remarked,
Avdeev was a drunkard. He loved drinking and drank all the time. He talked about the Tsar with malice. He cursed him in any way he could, called him bloody and bloodthirsty. The main thing he cursed him for was the war. He believed that the Tsar wanted this war, and for 3 years he spilled the blood of the workers, and that masses of these workers were shot in this war.
Anatoly Yakimov relates the following.
It is a shame to admit it, but all of us, to the last man, we were more or less guilty as to those unfortunates. It was difficult for these young boorish peasants, elevated to this role of guards, to stop themselves, if only in their heads, from the temptation to satisfy their animal instincts. They made fun of the defenseless girls. Our comrades from the factory later became more humane, but Zlokazov's young studs stayed as vicious as before. They would keep on continually offending those young girls and watched their every move. I often pitied those girls. For example, if they were playing music on the piano, they smiled, but tears fell from their eyes onto the keys.
The girls found it very difficult to understand and adapt to this new atmosphere. Their immediate surroundings from the time of their birth had always consisted of officers and soldiers of the Imperial Guard. It was therefore entirely natural for them to approach these men and begin conversations with them. Moreover, even during their captivity up to that point, especially in Tobolsk, their relationship with their guards had been fairly good. Their surprise was therefore great when they attempted to approach the soldiers at the Ipatiev House. Andrei Strakotin, a guard at the Ipatiev House, characteristically relates,
The prisoners constantly tried to start conversations with the Red Guards. One time during the time of walk in the garden, the Tsar approached me quietly and said, "Tell me, is Yekaterinburg a big city like Moscow?" I responded, and having tossed the rifle up on the belt, I walked away. The most eager to talk were the daughters, with the exception of Olga. They would often begin a conversation by saying, "We are bored." Once, when they approached the Red Guard Nikolai Stepanovich with this sort of conversation, he responded roughly, "There is no need to distract me, you can just stomp along." They looked at one another fearfully and silently continued walking along the path. The upstairs guard post, immediately outside the rooms where the prisoners lived, was especially difficult. There, almost every minute, members of the Imperial family passed by the guard post. The daughters, in particular, would smile at the guard, try to begin a conversation, and often stop at the post. I stood at that post only once and declined to serve there again afterward.
In another instance, as Nicholas sat at the table with his daughters, a drunken Avdeev struck him in the face with his elbow. Yakimov commented on the incident.
It is better that Alexandra Fyodorovna did not see this shame. Her husband and daughters felt that they needed to hide from her the truth of what happened.
One of the family's servants, who had accompanied them into captivity and was imprisoned with them in the Ipatiev House, became seriously ill. As a result, he was replaced by the footman Alexei. This change ultimately saved Kommodorov's life and thereby preserved his valuable testimony concerning the life of the prisoners in the Ipatiev House. In his recollections, he characterized the soldiers guarding the family as follows.
They were completely dissolute and rude, without any barriers, with lit cigars in their teeth and their shameful comportment. They breathed disgust and revulsion. When members of the family passed next to the guards, they would rattle their weapons to frighten them. Some of the guards devoted their time of service to drawing and writing on the walls of the hallways and bathrooms whatever was most shameful. A favorite theme of their vulgar drawings was to make shameful depictions of the Empress with Rasputin.
Even though the guards wrote and drew these images where it was impossible for the prisoners not to see them, they found particular pleasure in asking the girls whether they had noticed them. The worst harassment of this kind came mainly from the guards stationed in the hallway outside the bathroom.
When one of the girls went to the bathroom, the guard began to amuse himself by asking where she was going and why. When the girl went inside, the guard turned toward the door of the bathroom and waited until the girl came out.
Yakimov confirmed these events, confessing with shame that the guards had indulged in shameful curiosity outside the girl's bedroom.